Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. So this is going to sound ridiculous, but I honestly didn't see it coming. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. I mean, who wants to think that their wife, the woman you've been with for 8 years, the mother of your 2 kids, the woman you've shared everything with, could cheat? That's some next-level denial stuff, right? But it happened. And here's how it all started. I had been noticing things for a while. Little things. Sophie, my wife, had been acting weird, more distant, quick with her temper, leaving the house more than usual. It wasn't like her to work late or go out with friends so much. Not that I thought she was cheating, mind you. I chalked it up to stress at work or whatever. She's a lawyer, so yeah, her hours are long. But I guess I should have been paying more attention. The first time I really started to get suspicious was when she came home late one night, about 2 a.m. I had been awake because, well, I'm a dad. I wake up at weird hours now, and I had trouble sleeping. So I'm lying there, half awake, when I hear the front door creak. She comes in, super quiet. Normally, she'd at least greet me, even if it's just a hey, I'm home sort of thing, but no. Nothing. I just hear her tiptoe up the stairs, which was odd because Sophie never tiptoed. She'd always stomp around the house like she was the only person living here. Anyway, I'm lying there trying to ignore it, but I can't. I get up, go downstairs, and check the clock. I pull out my phone and send her a message, asking where she's been. She takes forever to reply, and when she does, it's something lame like, sorry, got caught up at the office. It's been a long day. Like, really? At 2 a.m.? You'd think she would have said something before, but it just felt off. I didn't say anything at first. I let it slide. But for the next few weeks, it started happening more and more. She'd come home late, barely speak to me, and when we did talk, it felt like she was always distracted. Her phone was constantly buzzing, but when I'd ask who it was, she'd get defensive. And that's when I started to get really paranoid. Sophie's never been the type to hide her phone, but suddenly, she'd be really protective of it. I tried to brush it off, tell myself I was just overthinking things, but one night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter. For the first time in months, I actually felt that nagging feeling, like I needed to check it. I wasn't planning to go full detective on her, but the temptation was too much. I unlocked her phone. And sure enough, I found a text thread with some guy named Mike. The messages were, I don't even know how to explain it. Flirty, intimate, stuff I never expected from her. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The worst part? The texts weren't recent. These were months-old exchanges. I was staring at the proof of something I wasn't even ready to face. She had been having an affair with Mike. And from what I could tell, it had been going on for a while. I could feel my stomach twisting. I was numb, but at the same time, my mind was racing. Who was this guy? Why didn't I see this? How could she do this to me? All these thoughts were spiraling, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her just yet. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Part of me was in shock, but another part of me was furious. I wish I could say I had the courage to confront her right away, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there, holding the phone, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. But this was just the beginning. I had no idea how much deeper the hole was going to get. And I had no idea how far I would go to get my revenge. The next few days were hell. I'm not even exaggerating. I couldn't look at her the same way. Every time I saw Sophie, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. All those years together, and suddenly, it felt like I didn't know a thing about her. And I couldn't shake the image of those text messages from Mike. It was like a cloud hanging over everything. But here's the thing, I didn't confront her. Not right away. I don't know if I was trying to protect myself or if I was still hoping it wasn't real, but I just kept my distance. I could barely talk to her without feeling like I was choking on my own anger. And I started noticing more stuff. She'd leave the house for hours, supposedly working late, but then I'd see the same guy, Mike, posting pictures with her on social media. Pictures from places I knew she'd never been with me. They were out at restaurants, on trips, hanging out, laughing like they were some damn perfect couple. The betrayal was suffocating. But I needed more. I needed to know everything. So, I hired a private investigator. Yeah, I know. It sounds dramatic, but I was losing my mind. I needed answers, and I wasn't about to sit around waiting for Sophie to tell me the truth. The PI was a guy named Dave, an old friend of a buddy from work. He was quiet, methodical, and professional, just what I needed. I didn't want to get my hands dirty, I just wanted the facts. And Dave? He didn't disappoint. A few days later, he called me. He was almost too calm. "I've got everything you need to know," he said. And boy, did he. Sophie wasn't just cheating on me. She was living a double life. I don't mean she was sneaking around every now and then. No, this was planned. She had secret bank accounts I'd never even heard of. And then there was the real estate stuff, properties in her name that she had been buying under the radar. I'm talking high-end condos, vacation homes in places I didn't even recognize. Places she'd never mentioned to me. Dave had pulled records from her business dealings too. Sophie wasn't just getting money from Mike, who, by the way, was a bigwig in a finance company, so he had the cash to back up her little escapes, but she was also laundering money through properties. She'd been doing this for years, hiding it from me. I felt sick. All these secrets. All these lies. I thought I knew my wife. I thought I trusted her. When I saw the full picture, everything came crashing down. She had been manipulating me, playing me for a fool. This wasn't just a random affair, it was a well-thought-out scheme. Sophie had been planning this for a long time, and she wasn't even ashamed of it. She was so careful about hiding it. How had I missed it? I wanted to lash out. I wanted to yell, scream, and confront her right then and there, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. She would lie, just like she always did. I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. But there was something else I didn't expect. Dave mentioned something else, almost casually, like it wasn't a big deal. He told me that Sophie had been talking about leaving me for a while now. And what stung the most? She was already planning her exit. The money, the properties, the secret accounts, it was all part of a plan to get out of the marriage without losing everything. She was already preparing for life without me. I didn't know what to do. Anger, heartbreak, and confusion all collided in my chest. I kept thinking about our kids. How could she do this to them? To me? I knew I couldn't just let this slide. Sophie had crossed a line, and I had no choice but to take action. But there was one thing I didn't expect. And it was coming next. Something that would push me even further down a path I wasn't sure I wanted to go. I wasn't the only one who had been betrayed. Remember that guy, Mike? Well, turns out, his wife Hannah was also in the dark. She had no idea about the affair. Dave had done some digging on her too, and it turned out that Hannah was just as blindsided as I was. And as fate would have it, I ran into her by accident. It was at a grocery store of all places. I was standing in line, just trying to get through the day, when I saw her. Hannah, Mike's wife. She was standing there with a cart full of groceries, looking completely lost. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, her face went pale. She recognized me immediately. And the strangest thing happened, she didn't seem mad. She looked broken. Like she had the same look on her face I had when I first found out about Sophie. Shock. Disbelief. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked up to her. "Hey Hannah," I said. "I don't know if you're aware, but I think you should know something about your husband." Her face twisted with confusion. "What are you talking about?" I hesitated for a second, then just laid it out. I told her about the affair. About Sophie and Mike. About all the lies. The secrets. She didn't cry, not right away. But I could see the way her hands started to shake. Her lips parted like she was trying to say something, but nothing came out. For a second, I felt bad. But then she just nodded, as if everything I said made sense. Like she'd suspected something was off, but hadn't been able to put her finger on it. And that's when the wildest thing happened. She looked at me, dead in the eyes, and said, "We need to do something about this." I didn't know what she meant at first, but as we talked more, it became clear. Hannah was as angry as I was. Maybe even more. She was hurt, humiliated, and furious, and she was ready to fight back. And that's how it all started, an unlikely alliance. Me and Mike's wife. The two people whose lives had been turned upside down by betrayal, now bound by a shared desire for revenge. After my conversation with Hannah in the grocery store, we decided to meet later that week. There was too much to unpack in the middle of a produce aisle, and she deserved to know everything I had found out. Honestly, I wasn't sure how much she'd want to get involved, but her reaction earlier had been enough to make me think she wasn't about to sit back and let Mike off the hook. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. She showed up in jeans and a sweater, looking exhausted but determined. We ordered our coffees and found a quiet corner. For a while, we just sat there in silence, neither of us sure where to start. Then she broke the ice. "So what do you know?" she asked, staring me down like she was ready for battle. I pulled out my phone and opened the file the PI had sent me. "Everything," I said. "I hired someone to look into Sophie. It turns out she's been lying to me for years. It's not just the affair. She's got secret accounts, properties, the whole 9 yards." Hannah blinked, absorbing the information. "Properties," she repeated, like she couldn't believe it. I nodded. "Yeah, and she's been using Mike to help her with some of it. He's not innocent in all of this. Your husband's been funding at least one of those condos." Her jaw tightened, and she looked away for a moment. "I knew something was off," she admitted. "Mike's always been secretive about money, but I never thought it was this." The pain in her voice was familiar. It mirrored how I'd felt just days ago. But there was also anger there, a simmering rage that I knew all too well. I could see she was ready to act, and honestly, that gave me a strange sense of hope. I wasn't in this alone. We spent the next hour going over everything. I showed her screenshots, bank statements, even photos the PI had taken of Sophie and Mike meeting at a hotel. Hannah flinched when she saw the images but didn't cry. Instead, she just sat there, staring at them with this cold, calculating look on her face. "So what's your plan?" she finally asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I've thought about confronting Sophie, but what's the point? She'd just lie. I want to make sure she can't weasel her way out of this." Hannah nodded slowly. "Same with Mike," she said. "He's always been good at talking his way out of trouble. If we're going to do this, we need to make it count." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt like I had an ally. Someone who understood the betrayal, the anger, the need for justice. We agreed to keep digging, to find every shred of evidence we could. But it wasn't just about gathering information anymore, it was about strategy. If Sophie and Mike thought they could get away with this, they were dead wrong. Hannah and I decided to meet regularly to share updates. We were going to be thorough, patient, and methodical. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure they couldn't destroy anyone else's life the way they had destroyed ours. As I left the coffee shop that day, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't drowning in my anger and pain. I had a purpose. And with Hannah by my side, I was ready to take on whatever came next. Hannah and I quickly got to work. We both knew this wasn't going to be easy, but we weren't about to back down. For the first few days, it was all about gathering as much evidence as we could. She started by digging through Mike's things, old emails, text messages, even his credit card statements. Meanwhile, I kept working with Dave, the private investigator, to trace more of Sophie's secret dealings. One night, Hannah called me, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Ryan, you won't believe this," she said. "I found emails between Mike and Sophie. They've been planning this for over a year." "What do you mean, planning?" I asked, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "They're talking about starting a new life together," she said bitterly. "There's even a message about transferring money to one of those accounts you mentioned. He's been funneling our savings into her little escape fund." Hearing her say it out loud made my stomach churn. It wasn't just an affair, they were building something together, using our lives as collateral. I clenched my jaw, the anger bubbling up again. "They really thought they'd get away with this," I said through gritted teeth. "Not a chance." Hannah sighed, and for a moment, I could hear her frustration turn to exhaustion. "Ryan, what are we even doing?" she asked quietly. "It feels like we're unraveling this huge mess, but what's the end game? How far are we willing to go?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. All I knew was that I couldn't let Sophie walk away unscathed, not after everything she'd done. "We keep going," I said finally. "We expose them for who they really are." Hannah didn't respond right away, but I could tell she was nodding on the other end. "Okay," she said. "I'll keep digging." The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Dave sent over more files, tax records, financial statements, even a deed for a beach house Sophie had apparently purchased under a fake name. I spent hours combing through the documents, piecing together her double life. Every discovery felt like a punch to the gut, but it also fueled my determination. Hannah, on the other hand, had a different approach. She started using psychological tactics to make Mike nervous. It started small, moving things around the house so he'd think he was losing his mind, casually dropping hints that she knew something but wouldn't elaborate. She was good at it, too. By the end of the week, Mike was visibly on edge, snapping at her over little things. "I want him to feel what I've felt," Hannah told me during one of our late-night calls. That constant paranoia, like the ground's about to crumble beneath him. Her words hit me hard because I knew exactly what she meant. For weeks, I'd felt like I was living on a fault line, waiting for the next betrayal to shake my world. If we could turn the tables, even for a little while, it felt like justice. But then something unexpected happened. Sophie came home one evening, unusually quiet. She barely looked at me, didn't touch her phone during dinner, and went to bed early. I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something was up. The next day, Dave confirmed it. "She's been talking to a lawyer," he told me. "Looks like she's trying to get ahead of this." My heart sank. Sophie was planning her move, just like always. But this time, I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. I shared the news with Hannah, and we both agreed it was time to act. "We need to go public," she said. "Expose them before they have a chance to spin this. Let everyone see who they really are." It was a bold move, and part of me hesitated. But deep down, I knew she was right. Sophie and Mike had been playing this game for too long. It was time to flip the board. That night, I stayed up late, drafting a plan. It was risky, but if we pulled it off, there'd be no escaping the fallout. As I stared at the papers spread across my desk, a strange sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting, I was in control. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was justice. And I wasn't going to stop until Sophie and Mike paid for every lie, every betrayal, every broken piece of the lives they'd left behind. The next step was to set everything in motion. Hannah and I knew we had to be methodical. Sophie and Mike were too good at covering their tracks to rush this. If we wanted to expose them, we needed undeniable proof, delivered in a way they couldn't spin. And we needed to hit them where it hurt. Our plan had 3 parts. First, we'd leak Sophie's shady real estate dealings to her law firm. Lawyers live and die by their reputation, and if hers took a hit, her carefully constructed facade would crumble. Second, we'd expose Mike's financial misdeeds at his company. Hannah had uncovered emails suggesting he'd been fudging numbers to hide his personal spending, likely to bankroll Sophie's lifestyle. Finally, we'd stage the reveal of their affair in a way that left no room for denial. But before we could go public, we needed to plant seeds of doubt in their minds. If Sophie and Mike thought someone was onto them, they'd start making mistakes, and mistakes would give us even more ammunition. Hannah was a natural at this part. She started leaving anonymous tips at Mike's office, hinting at irregularities in his accounts. Nothing concrete, just enough to make him sweat. Meanwhile, I began slipping subtle questions into conversations with Sophie. I ran into Hannah the other day, I'd say casually. She mentioned Mike's been really busy lately. Everything okay with him? Her reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. She'd freeze for just a second, her eyes darting away before she forced a smile. "Oh, I wouldn't know," she'd reply, her voice too light. "We haven't talked much lately." It was a lie, of course, and now I had proof she was starting to feel the heat. Things escalated a few days later when Hannah called me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mike's freaking out," she said. "He's been tearing through his files, mumbling about someone digging into things. He even accused me of snooping." I couldn't help but smile. "Good," I said. "Let him stew." But Sophie wasn't as easy to rattle. She was careful, calculating. Even when I tried to throw her off balance, she kept her composure, at least, until she got a mysterious letter in the mail. I'd had Dave send it, a plain envelope containing nothing but a printout of one of her bank statements. The one tied to her secret account. No note, no explanation, just the statement. When she opened it, her face turned white. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern as I watched her from across the kitchen. She hesitated, then quickly shoved the paper into her purse. "Yeah," she said, her voice tight. "Just work stuff." I wanted to laugh at how transparent she was, but I kept my expression neutral. Let her squirm, I thought. That evening, Hannah and I met up again to review our progress. We'd been meeting at her cousin's house, a neutral, out-of-the-way spot where we wouldn't risk running into Sophie or Mike. I think it's working, I told her, relaying what had happened with the letter. Hannah smirked. Mike's the same. He's been snapping at everyone at work. One of his co-workers told me he's been locking himself in his office, making calls all day. Perfect, I said. The more paranoid they get, the better. But Hannah wasn't smiling anymore. Ryan, are we sure about this? She asked suddenly. I mean, going public. It's a big step. What if it blows back on us? I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. She had a point. Once we exposed Sophie and Mike, there'd be no going back. Everyone, friends, family, co-workers, would know. It would be messy, and there was no guarantee we'd come out of it unscathed. But then I thought about all the lies, the betrayals, the months, years, of deception. I thought about the life Sophie had stolen from me, the future I'd been building that she'd thrown away like it meant nothing. They made their choice, I said finally. Now it's time for them to face the consequences. Hannah nodded, her expression hardening. You're right, she said. Let's do this. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spiral. Sophie and Mike were on edge, and it was only a matter of time before one of them cracked. The question was, who would break first? The paranoia started to eat away at Sophie and Mike. I could see it in Sophie's every move. She was no longer the composed, self-assured woman I once knew. Now she jumped whenever her phone buzzed, flinched at unexpected knocks on the door, and avoided eye contact with me. It was subtle at first, but as the days passed, her anxiety became impossible to hide. Hannah reported the same about Mike. He's unraveling, she told me during one of our late-night calls. I overheard him arguing with someone on the phone. I think it's Sophie. He was yelling about how this isn't what they agreed to. It was confirmation that our tactics were working. The seeds of doubt we'd planted were growing, and the tension between them was starting to fracture their alliance. One night, I decided to press Sophie a little harder. It was a Friday, and she came home later than usual, claiming she'd been working late. I knew better. I'd had Dave follow her earlier that day. She hadn't been at the office. She'd been at a coffee shop downtown, meeting with Mike. Late night again? I asked, keeping my tone casual as she slipped off her heels by the door. She hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. Yeah, big case coming up. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. Funny, I said, tilting my head. I drove past your office today. It didn't look that busy. Her eyes widened, but she quickly masked her reaction with a forced laugh. You must have missed the rush, she said lightly, brushing past me toward the living room. Maybe, I replied, letting her think she'd dodged the bullet. But her stiff posture and quick retreat told me otherwise. She was rattled. Hannah and I decided it was time to tighten the noose. We gathered everything we had, emails, bank statements, photos, and started organizing it into two separate files, one for Sophie's law firm and one for Mike's company. The evidence was damning. Sophie's secret accounts and fraudulent real estate deals were meticulously documented, and Mike's shady financial practices were laid out in black and white. We can't just send this stuff anonymously, Hannah said as we reviewed the files. We need to make sure it gets noticed. She was right. A random envelope might get ignored or buried. We needed to deliver it in a way that would force people to take it seriously. Hannah suggested using certified mail to their workplaces, addressed to key decision-makers. It'll raise eyebrows immediately, she said. No one ignores certified mail. I agreed, but I also wanted to add a personal touch. I drafted a brief cover letter for each file, written in plain, unemotional language. The letter simply stated that the enclosed materials contained evidence of serious misconduct and urged the recipients to conduct their own investigations. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight. We sealed the envelopes and placed them in a box. That's it, I said, exhaling deeply. Once these go out, there's no turning back. Hannah looked at me, her expression unreadable. Are you ready for this? She asked quietly. I wasn't sure how to answer. Part of me still felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, Sophie was the woman I'd loved for years, the mother of my children. But that love had been shattered by her lies, and I couldn't let sentimentality hold me back. I have to be, I said finally. They don't get to walk away from this unscathed. Hannah nodded, her resolve matching mine. Then let's finish this. The next day, we mailed the envelopes. Watching the postal worker stamp them and place them in the outgoing bin felt surreal. It was the point of no return. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anticipation, and a simmering anger that refused to fade. Now, all we could do was wait. Wait for the fallout. Wait for the lies to unravel. Wait for Sophie and Mike's perfect little worlds to come crashing down. It didn't take long for the first wave to hit. 3 days after mailing the evidence, Hannah called me in a panic. "Ryan, it's happening," she said, her voice almost breathless. "Mike just got called into a meeting with HR. I overheard him yelling at someone on the phone right before that. I'm pretty sure it was Sophie." I felt a surge of adrenaline. What was he saying? "He kept asking if she knew anything about this," she said. I couldn't catch all of it, but he sounded desperate. Like he was trying to pin it on her. That made me smile. Their perfect little partnership was unraveling faster than I'd hoped. "Keep me posted," I told her. "I will," she said. "Ryan, I think this is really going to work." I wanted to believe her, but I knew better than to celebrate too early. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Sophie. "We need to talk." I stared at my phone for a long moment, my stomach twisting. I knew what this was about, but I wasn't ready to let her control the narrative. Instead of replying, I waited until she got home that evening. She walked in with a tense expression, her usual confidence replaced with something closer to fear. "You got my text," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "I did," I replied evenly. "What's this about?" She hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Something's going on at work," she said. "Someone's been spreading rumors about me. Serious ones." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of rumors?" Her eyes darted away. "Just things that could hurt my reputation." I leaned forward, my arms resting on the counter. "Funny," I said. "It sounds like you've got something to hide." Her head snapped up, and for the first time, I saw real panic in her eyes. "Ryan, you don't understand," she said quickly. "This isn't what it looks like." "Then what is it, Sophie?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for years." She opened her mouth to respond but then closed it again, as if she couldn't decide whether to deny it or come clean. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she broke. "I made some mistakes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't want to hurt you, Ryan. I was trying to protect our family." I laughed bitterly. Protect our family? By funneling money into secret accounts? By buying properties I didn't know about? By sleeping with Mike? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead of tears, I saw something else: anger. "You don't understand," she snapped. "You think everything's so black and white, but it's not. Mike and I," she stopped herself, as if realizing she'd said too much. "Mike and you what?" I pressed. "Go ahead, Sophie. Finish that sentence." She didn't. Instead, she grabbed her bag and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. The next day, I got a call from Dave. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Sophie's law firm has launched an internal investigation. They're looking into her accounts and transactions. It's all over the office." I couldn't help but smile. Good. She deserves it. Dave chuckled. "That's not all. I've been keeping an eye on Mike, too. His company's auditing his expenses. Word is, he's been suspended pending further review." The news was like a shot of pure adrenaline. Everything we'd worked for was finally paying off. Sophie and Mike's house of cards was collapsing, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. That evening, Hannah called me, her voice tight with excitement. "Mike's losing it," she said. "He's been pacing around the house, yelling at his lawyer on the phone. I think he knows it's over." "Good," I said. "They both need to know what it feels like to lose everything." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "Ryan," she said softly, "do you ever think about what happens after this? When it's all over?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I hadn't thought that far ahead. My life had been consumed by this revenge, and the idea of what came next felt distant, almost irrelevant. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'll figure it out." Hannah sighed. "Yeah, me too." The fallout wasn't over yet, but the first cracks had turned into fractures. Sophie and Mike were scrambling, desperate to save their reputations, their careers, their lives. And as satisfying as it was to see them squirm, I knew the real explosion was still to come. The fallout from our plan was escalating faster than either of us expected. By midweek, Sophie was working from home, a move she claimed was to focus, but I knew it was to avoid the whispers at her office. Mike wasn't faring much better. According to Hannah, he had stopped coming home on time, choosing to stay out late, probably drinking away his nerves. "They're unraveling," Hannah said when we met to compare notes. She looked tired, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Mike's barely speaking to me. He's living on edge, and it's only a matter of time before he snaps." "Good," I replied. "They need to feel like they're losing control." But despite their growing panic, I knew we couldn't let up. If we gave Sophie and Mike even a moment to regroup, they'd find a way to spin this in their favor. They were too cunning to underestimate. 2 days later, I got another call from Dave. "Ryan, I've got something big," he said. My heart raced. "What is it?" "I traced one of Sophie's secret accounts to a wire transfer from Mike's personal savings," he said. "It's not just about the affair anymore. This is fraud, plain and simple. They've been moving money around, covering their tracks. If this gets out, it's not just their reputations on the line, it's criminal." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. It was one thing to expose their affair and professional misconduct, but criminal charges? That was a whole new level. "Send me everything," I said finally. "Already did," Dave replied. "Check your email." I opened the file as soon as I hung up. Sure enough, the records were damning. Transfers between Sophie's accounts and Mike's, suspicious withdrawals, payments to real estate agents, all of it screamed conspiracy. I forwarded the file to Hannah with a single line: "We need to meet." That evening, we sat in her living room, the file spread out on the coffee table between us. Hannah stared at the papers, her expression a mix of disbelief and fury. "They didn't just cheat on us," she said finally. "They used us. They used our money, our lives, to fund this. Whatever this is." Her voice cracked, and she looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "How did we let it get this far, Ryan?" I didn't have an answer. All I could do was shake my head and lean back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. After a long silence, Hannah spoke again, her tone steely. "We have to go all in. No holding back." I met her gaze. "Are you sure? Once we take this public, it's going to get messy. For both of us." "I don't care," she said, her jaw set. "They deserve everything that's coming to them." The next morning, I made a call to a reporter I'd met years ago through a friend. She was the type who thrived on uncovering scandals, and I knew this story would be right up her alley. "I have something you'll want to see," I told her. "It's big." She was intrigued but cautious. "What's the angle?" she asked. "Corporate fraud, infidelity, and a tangled web of lies," I replied. "And I've got the receipts." We agreed to meet later that day. I brought a carefully curated set of documents, just enough to pique her interest without giving away the whole story. The reporter's eyes widened as she flipped through the papers. "This is wow," she said, looking up at me. "Do you have more?" "Plenty," I said. "But I need you to promise me something. When you run this story, you don't protect them. No anonymity, no watered-down versions. They need to face the consequences." She nodded. "If the evidence holds up, I'll make sure they do." By the time I got home that evening, my phone was buzzing with notifications. The reporter had done her homework, and the story was already gaining traction. The headline was brutal: "Corporate power couple caught in fraud and infidelity scandal." Hannah called me almost immediately. "Have you seen it?" she asked, her voice a mix of triumph and disbelief. "Yeah," I said. "It's out there now." "What happens next?" she asked. I didn't know. But as I stared at the article, watching Sophie and Mike's carefully constructed world implode, I realized one thing: this was just the beginning. The article hit like a bombshell. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. The headline was splashed across news sites, social media, and even a local TV segment. Sophie and Mike's names were suddenly synonymous with scandal, and their lives were on full display for everyone to see. Sophie was the first to break. I found her sitting at the kitchen table that morning, her face pale, her laptop open to the article. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Did you know about this?" she asked, her voice hollow. I shrugged, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. "I've been hearing whispers," I said casually. Her head shot up, her eyes narrowing. Don't play dumb, Ryan. Someone leaked this. Someone with access to everything. I met her gaze, my face calm but my chest pounding. Maybe the truth has a way of coming out, I said evenly. She stared at me for a long moment, then slammed the laptop shut and stormed out of the room. Hannah called me a few hours later, her voice shaky but triumphant. Mike's been fired, she said. They didn't even wait for the investigation to finish. They called him in this morning and handed him a termination letter. He's furious. Good, I said. Sophie's barely holding it together. She knows it's only a matter of time before her firm does the same. We talked for a while, sharing updates and trying to process everything that was happening. It was surreal, watching the plan we'd spent weeks crafting unfold so perfectly. But there was still a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a sense that the worst was yet to come. By the end of the day, Sophie's law firm had issued a statement confirming that she was under investigation for unethical practices. The media picked up on it immediately, and suddenly her face was everywhere. People were calling her a fraud, a liar, a disgrace. That evening, she came home late, her face drawn and her eyes rimmed with red. She didn't say a word to me, just went straight upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, reading comment after comment on the news articles. People were ruthless, tearing Sophie and Mike apart, dissecting every detail of their lives. It should have felt satisfying, but instead, it left me feeling empty. Hannah called again that night, her voice subdued. Mike's threatening to leave, she said. He told me he's going to start fresh somewhere else. Are you going to let him? I asked. She sighed. I don't know. Part of me wants him gone, but another part, I want him to face what he's done. He doesn't get to just walk away. We were quiet for a while, both of us lost in thought. Finally, she spoke again. Ryan, are we doing the right thing? Her question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on the plan, so consumed by the need for revenge, that I hadn't stopped to think about what it was costing us. I don't know, I admitted. But it's too late to stop now. The next morning, Sophie confronted me. She was pacing the kitchen, her face a mix of anger and desperation. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. What I've done? Sophie, you did this to yourself. You lied, you cheated, and now you're paying the price. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. You don't understand, she said. I didn't want it to be like this. Save it, I interrupted. You had your chance to explain, Sophie. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them. She stared at me, her face crumpling, then turned and walked out the door without another word. Hannah and I knew the fallout was far from over. Sophie and Mike were scrambling to pick up the pieces, but there was no escaping the truth. They had built their lives on lies, and now those lies were tearing them apart. As I sat alone that night, staring at the empty house around me, I couldn't help but wonder if Hannah's question had been right. Were we doing the right thing? But then I thought about all the pain they had caused, the lies, the betrayal, the years of deceit. And I realized I wasn't ready to let go of my anger. Not yet. The next day, Sophie made her move. I woke up to a voicemail from her lawyer, demanding a meeting. My stomach tightened as I listened, but I couldn't say I was surprised. Sophie wasn't the type to roll over without a fight. When she came downstairs later, her expression was cold, her usual veneer of charm replaced by something sharper. I know it was you, she said flatly. I didn't even try to deny it. Good, I replied. Then you know I'm done being your fool. Her lips tightened into a thin line. You've made a mistake, Ryan. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. Oh, I know exactly what I've started, I said, stepping closer. And it's about time someone held you accountable for all the lies, Sophie. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say another word. Instead, she grabbed her bag and left the house, slamming the door behind her. By the time I arrived at the lawyer's office later that day, I was ready for a fight. Sophie was already there, sitting across from her attorney, her arms crossed and her expression icy. Her lawyer, a sleek woman with a polished demeanor, wasted no time. Mr. Carter, she began, my client has informed me that you've been engaging in behavior intended to harm her reputation and career. These actions have caused significant distress and have the potential to impact your shared assets. I fought the urge to laugh. Her reputation was built on lies, I said evenly. And as for our assets, maybe she should have thought about that before funneling money into secret accounts and buying properties behind my back. Sophie flinched, but her lawyer didn't miss a beat. If you have evidence of financial misconduct, you'll need to present it through the proper channels, she said smoothly. But I'd advise you to consider the consequences of escalating this situation further. Both of you stand to lose if this becomes a legal battle. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. Funny. That sounds an awful lot like a threat. It's a reality check, Sophie snapped. You think you're in control, but you're not, Ryan. You're just as vulnerable as I am. I locked eyes with her, refusing to back down. Then I guess we'll see who falls first. The meeting ended with no resolution, just more tension and unspoken threats. As I walked out of the office, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and satisfaction. Sophie was scrambling, and she hated it. That evening, I met up with Hannah to fill her in. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she shook her head. She's trying to scare you, she said. Don't let her. I won't, I said firmly. But Hannah didn't seem reassured. Ryan, what if she tries to turn this against us? We're not exactly innocent in all of this. Her words hit me like a cold splash of water. She was right. As much as I hated to admit it, we'd crossed lines too. Leaking their secrets, manipulating them, it wasn't exactly the high road. What do we do? I asked. Hannah sighed, running a hand through her hair. We stay ahead of them. We stick to the truth, and we don't give them any more ammunition to use against us. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was the best we had. The next few days were tense. Sophie avoided me, staying out late and keeping her distance whenever she was home. Meanwhile, Hannah reported that Mike was becoming increasingly volatile, snapping at her over the smallest things and drinking more than usual. Then one evening, Sophie blindsided me. She came home earlier than usual, her face a mask of calm that immediately put me on edge. I've spoken to my lawyer, she said as she dropped her bag by the door. If you want to drag this out, fine. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you ruin me. I didn't respond right away, studying her carefully. There was something in her tone, something almost triumphant, that sent a shiver down my spine. What are you planning, Sophie? I asked. She smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made my blood run cold. You'll find out soon enough. And with that she walked away, leaving me standing in the kitchen with a sinking feeling in my gut. Later that night, Hannah called me, her voice laced with urgency. Ryan, something's wrong, she said. Mike got a call from Sophie earlier. He's been acting strange ever since, like he's planning something. What kind of something? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. But I think they're working together again. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. If Sophie and Mike were teaming up, it meant they weren't just reacting anymore, they were preparing to strike back. We need to be ready, I said, my mind racing. Whatever they're planning, we can't let them get the upper hand. Hannah agreed, but I could hear the worry in her voice. And as I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but wonder if we were about to face a storm we weren't prepared to weather.